Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. Analytics topics covered conversationally and sometimes with explicit language. Here are your hosts, Mo, Michael, and Tim.
Hi, everybody. It's the Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 177. Hi, Mo Kiss. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm pretty good. Yeah.
Nice. All right. How you going? Maybe
How you going?
A better way.
Yeah.
How you going?
Wow. 177 episodes.
I know. I just try.
Finally.
Tim,
yeah.
Welcome.
Yep.
Tim Wilson.
Happy to be here.
So these are my two co-hosts. It's great to have you. I'm Michael Hobling, and we're getting another episode started. And we're getting back to something we've talked about a good amount of time, but I'm kind of excited to talk about it the way we're going to talk about it today. So let's jump into it. There's a lot of discussions about how technical an analyst or data scientist should be, what technical skills they should learn. And they usually lead us into this realm of thinking about what different tools or skills or programming languages and things like that. But, maybe we should also be considering mindset. How do we approach problem solving or for the challenges we run into that are both technical and not so technical? Anyway, I think to have this conversation, we wanted to bring in a guest who could help us sort through some of this. Someone with a lot of experience working with a lot of different data science teams and solving a lot of different problems across a lot of different things. And we think we found the perfect guest. Hilary Parker is a data scientist. She's worked at Etsy, Stitch Fix, and also the Biden presidential campaign. She has her PhD from Johns Hopkins University and is a distinguished podcaster on the Not So Standard Deviations podcast. And today she's our guest. Welcome to the show, Hilary.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
First question, how did you land Roger when I went up with these guys?
Yeah, exactly. Tim does like Roger, because didn't you take his R course, Tim?
That was literally my very first introduction to R, because there was a whole
Same.
group. Like, actually,
Yeah.
Mo's sister, Michelle, was like, part of the group that's like, let's all take Roger's course at the same time. And
Stop
then, like,
it.
I was on like the second one. I'm like, hey, are you guys like, I'm struggling with the second one. They're like, oh yeah, I bailed. There were like 3 or 4 people. And I'm like, you fuckers, like, what the hell?
I never knew my sister agreed to do that course. Are you kidding me?
I mean, it was years ago, but I'm not bitter.
Anyway.
So, anyway. Good side diversion. But anyways, Hilary, welcome to the show. Maybe just tell us a little bit about some of your background just to get us started, and then we'll get a little more into the deeper questions around sort of some of the other things.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, I have my PhD in biostatistics from Hopkins. That was actually the School of Public Health. So they're in the news all the time these days with COVID, obviously. So I was there before it was cool, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to put it.
For anyone who thinks that there's a long time between when we record and when this comes out, now they can tell. If people are like, what? COVID? Johns Hopkins? Yeah. Is there data from there? Then they'll know.
So yeah, I went there 5 years. That's where I met Roger, to answer your question. That's how I got, my excellent co-host. And then from there, I transitioned into tech. And so I've been working in tech since then. So that's since mid-2013. And yeah, I love the companies I've worked at, both Etsy and Stitch Fix. Kind of took this turn and have been working more in the arts and just like a totally different application than medicine, obviously. And then the Biden campaign was obviously totally different, but
it seems like there are a ton of biostatistics. Like, that seems like an area that a lot of people who wind up then being kind of prolific R users, data science educator types. I mean, not formal educators. Mm-hmm. You actually went full into kind of the digital. I mean, it's funny listening to Not So Standard Deviations, and I was like, oh, she literally made it all the way into the world of digital analytics somewhat, which was that a incredibly frustrating, what are these people thinking they're doing with their data? Or did you not wind up in some of the cases where...
You mean like when I started in tech?
Well, yeah. Like, was you were starting to work with digital data, and were you running into people like just literally taking aggregated data and drawing conclusions and thinking there was causality there, or?
So no, because I think especially at Etsy when I first came in, I seem to join companies like right before they go public. I should say the two companies I've worked at. But I think generally when I've joined companies, they're like looking to like beef up their data science efforts. And so at Etsy was a really good first landing place for me because there were some key engineers early on who were really wanted for Etsy to be very data driven and do tons of A/B testing. And they had already like an A/B testing platform. And so I think there was so much like discussion and wheel spinning with that, where the engineers had kind of gotten to the max of where they could with these discussions without the formal training and statistics, that they were looking to bring someone on who could help like everyone understand what was going on and how to make decisions in those contexts. So I was very much welcomed with open arms. And so I was I kind of thought it was how everyone operated, but I landed at a place that was pretty sophisticated, hence trying to hire me, not to be like, oh, well, obviously only sophisticated places would hire, but you get the idea. I wasn't coming in as the first data scientist. I was coming into fairly mature operations. And I would say, though, that it's not like it hasn't been a frustrating experience, just in different ways than what you're suggesting.
But it sounds like a positive relationship with stakeholders is something that you've talked about quite a lot previously.
Yes.
And it in your experience, seems to be that you've chosen the companies that are ready. Do you kind of feel like there is a lot of frustration for people that work with data when you go into a company that's not ready? Like, do you think maybe we should all just pick our battles and make sure we're going to a company that is kind of ready to have those conversations? Is that the best way to go?
Well, I mean, someone needs to do it. This is actually why I am not worry. I don't know if worry is the right word, but the fact that people are now getting MBAs in data science and there's just going to be like hordes of people going into the workforce with this training, I'm like, hooray, go to those companies that need to like have their first data effort. Like, I would very gladly let you guys set up the infrastructure and everything, and then I can come in when the job gets fun, which is I don't really mean that, but it's so I think it really depends on your personality, right? And what you want. I think there's probably, if you were to go into a company which is just never used data in that way, not sophisticated, then you would be like the VP of data by the end of your effort. And so if that's your career goal, like, I think that's a really smart way to go about it. Especially if like the person who hired me at Etsy didn't have a PhD in statistics. She's a brilliant leader. She's now CTO of the DNC, but like she didn't have what maybe would be thought of as the needed credentialing at even someplace like Stitch Fix. There was clearly like hiring PhDs was a priority. And so I think that there's like lots of opportunity in that case. But is it the type of job that would bring me joy? No. Unless I was super passionate about the product, and like I'm starting to realize, as I get farther into my career, like I think the circumstances where I'd want to do that is if it were like my company or, like something that I had a huge amount of ownership. And then I was so invested in like, oh, I really want to do this stuff and I need to build it up, versus being hired to come in and like shape up an operation. So, yeah.
But you seem to like to actually keep your hands pretty dirty while also trying to figure out what are the opportunities for process or systemic change. Is that like you've done like really cool projects where your hands you were definitely doing it, but then a lot of your musings and even like the opinionated analysis paper that I'm sure we'll chat about here a bit were around like, what are things that are kind of wrong, which I think to me is kind of different from, I'm going to teach an organization how to use data effectively.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I I don't think you can really be, like, I hate this term, like a quote unquote thought leader without doing the work yourself to some degree. You know, it's just like you won't come up with the right ideas if you're just like so zoomed out that you're only kind of watching these organizations work. And then, yeah, like I derive a lot of joy from building things. So like the system building stuff that I've talked about, like both in kind of the DevOps sense of like how do you like the opinionated analysis development paper you're suggesting, and then also in the more product sense of like, hey, here's how we could build a product that like collects the right data and that leverages that data in a way that's really interesting. And so I enjoy that all a lot. And yeah, I also am just the type, like the way my brain works, the way I'm psychologically organized, however you want to put it, I do just like having things, like making things clean and organized. So I think that's like probably something most data people like, but setting up databases with the right schemas and making sure we're recording everything and have everything set up to like work really well later on is just like fun for me. So yeah.
All right, let's step aside for a minute for a word about our sponsor, ObservePoint. Just like we strive to have confidence in the quality of this podcast, ObservePoint gives data professionals confidence in their data and insights. Isn't that right, Mo?
Yeah, that's right. So we're still looking for a platform that can make sure this show is high quality, but ObservePoint has thankfully got that problem solved for website data collection. So their platform really enables teams to automatically audit the tags on the site to make sure they're in place and capturing things correctly.
There's nothing quite as soul-crushing for an analyst as to dive into a user pathing analysis only to discover that the tagging was dropped from the shopping cart for the past 2 weeks and no one noticed.
So with ObservePoint, once the platform's set up to check the site, you can rest easy as a data analyst knowing you'll get alerted immediately if something goes wrong.
And the results of each automated audit is recorded in the platform, so the team can track whether their data quality processes are improving or degrading over time. It's time series data about the collection of data.
Is that meta or what? Obviously, you'd love to learn more, so go ahead and request a demonstration over at observepoint.com/analytics power hour. There you can learn all about ObservePoint's full data governance capabilities. All right, let's get back to the show.
So, okay, I'm so interested by you and your career, but we are here to talk about this topic of design thinking. And it was really interesting listening to you previously discuss this and how sometimes you think like the word data can almost just be interchanged. So do you want to give like a bit of an overview, I guess, about what you mean by design thinking and how it applies to the space of data?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so the idea of design thinking kind of represented a breakthrough that Roger and I had early on in our podcast, Not So Standard Deviations, which was, so the first episode of that podcast was Roger kind of posing this question. Like, he was the one who had the idea for the podcast, and he was kind of like, I have this like question, to start us off. And it was essentially like, how do you tell people what to do? like so much of the statistics training is around what could go wrong with these various things. And I guess he had a student in one of his intro classes come up and be like, I feel like I know what not to do, or like the errors I can make, but I don't actually know like how to build an analysis. And he was like, I went back to my desk and sat down and tried to like, let me figure this one out, and like essentially couldn't. And then we started talking about it, and it's like, oh, this isn't doable. This isn't just something you can figure out like and teach in an intro class and have that be that. And so we were circling around that topic for a long time. And I mean, what does it even mean for an analysis to be successful or correct, or, however you want to define? Even talking about it being done is not actually something you can, I think it's the type of thing that you probably think like, oh, I get it. But if you actually started to talk about it and started to define it, it would get difficult fast. We sort of had this breakthrough, and just by coincidence, I had done a design sprint, which is this sort of specific implementation of design thinking with someone at Stitch Fix, and was like, wow, this really is like scratching an itch. And then I started to read books about it and was like flipping out. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what that missing, like how to do it right. This is how we can define it and do this. And so the concept of design thinking is like, essentially the people who've created this field, or I don't know, like professional designers are like, oh, the way that this is a different type of intelligence than like scientific thinking or artistic thinking. It's kind of this third thing, and it's this much more constructive state of mind where, you know, the way that architects work, the way that web designers work, you're actually building something functional. So it's not just kind of like emotional expression like art, but it's like this kind of functional like building of something. And so basically when I say like design thinking for data science or this concept, it's the idea that you're actually in this constructive state where you're building out an art, usually building out some sort of argument or for some sort of decision, or you could be building like a recommender system. You know, there's more product focused applications of this too. But like when designers work, they know that someone like gives them the design brief, and then they have to work with that client, and they have, you know, a lot of I wouldn't call it process, but there's a lot of process around like, okay, I'm going to give this client like 3 options. We're going to talk through it. I know that when I get the design brief, it'll be like a jumble of words that don't make sense. And we actually need to parse what that is in order to deliver what they want. They'll ask for something, but they actually want something totally different. And so I think that that's where I'm like, you could just interchange these words. Because I think if you say like a data analyst instead of a designer, it's the same thing where you'll get a request for a specific number. And it's like, okay, let me zoom out. What are you actually trying to solve? Let's talk through, like, let me understand your context. Are you comfortable with like spreadsheets, or do you want graphs? Or, you know, those are simplistic, but it's like, how can you tailor this information and like guidance on decision making to this person so that they accept it and they're able to use it. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but when I think about design thinking, that's what I mean. It's like there's obviously a lot of technical aspects with how you do analysis and the statistical tests, the properties of those, but like actually pulling that together into a useful argument or deliverable or whatever you want to call it is kind of a totally different skill set, a totally different mindset and like type of intelligence, many would argue, than, you know, understanding the asymptotics of some sort of statistical test.
So is part of the design thinking around, I've noticed there can be a tendency for analysts and even for stakeholders to just kind of, there may be 5 paths forward, but man, they hit the first one and they just start following it. And is part of the design thinking the stop and think, like frame the problem, frame the different avenues of pursuit, think that through. Is there a slowing down part that is kind of trying to put some sort of scaffolding, saying we're not going to go answer the marketing question. That's like way too big, and we're not going to go back and just give you your one number. Is that part of it that's trying to kind of think strategically? Is that a fair way to? Yes,
and actually this was that specific kind of aspect of it that you're describing. It was that moment of like, oh my gosh, finally this vocabulary, this language, this, I don't know, paradigm that describes this process. So that the idea that the designer's work is framing the problem, like that is part of what they're bringing to the table, is digesting the words that are coming at them, the request, and framing the problem. And then usually once you frame the problem correctly, the solution it flows very obviously from that. And so that, again, like, I don't think the reason why I'm like, oh, design isn't because there's something special about those applications. It's just that they're like 10 to 15 years ahead of us. So that's already kind of like that's taught in school, and that's this very accepted part of the vocation, and designers talk to each other about it. And like if you talk to designers, they have the same frustration around their briefs that they get that we have around like getting asked for a number, right? And so, but like there's an author, Nigel Cross, who we read one of his books for the Not So Standard Deviations podcast. And he has a lot, if you're interested in this from like a kind of academic standpoint, a lot of his papers are talking through establishing this as an academic field and as a fundamental type of intelligence, with the explicit goal of then being able to get it taught at like in grade schools, because it's like, oh, you take your science classes, your art classes, and like you could, if you frame it that way and establish it like that, then it's not vocational, it's actually like this kind of fundamental intelligence thing. It's a very like education focused.
Wait, so that's who's gonna bump the no statistics and thinking probabilistically needs to get taught in grade school, and that's the concept that's gonna screw us over on that, because they're gonna win out.
I mean, I think it would help us, right? I guess I'm not sure, because I think that divorcing it from math means that you're not necessarily competing with like calculus anymore for like, hey, we only have this amount of time to teach students probability, and instead it's like, hey, here's a way of like constructing art, like the same way you learn constructing essays, like those like 5-paragraph essay formats. Like you could see that happening with analysis, where it's like, okay, here's how you construct an argument using numbers.
Wait a minute, so I was peeved when my son got told when he was getting into college that the year that he took statistics, because some other class wasn't, he was like, oh, you didn't take a math that semester in high school.
Funny.
So I was like,
yeah.
Oh. So I've been on the kick of like, I was annoyed at the time, and now I've come to be very excited that math is deterministic and statistics is probabilistic, which is probably an oversimplification, but that's been my little flight of fancy on the.
That's just weird, like. Like someone made, I don't know. That's like seems like a weird college thing.
It was weird, but I mean, he wound up getting into he's getting his CS and math degree, and so it worked out. And the reason he couldn't take that's a whole other side.
Okay, Tim, you're killing me.
So carry on.
There is way too much stuff to talk about.
Okay.
So Hilary, you and Roger started talking about this like years ago, and I suppose the thing, well, context first. In Australia, everyone who works in data is obsessed with Stitch Fix. Like, I mean, we all follow the blog. Like, it's like the pinnacle whenever we talk about, you know, what we want our data team to look and work like. And I'm sure on the inside it's always different. But as you have evolved, I guess, your understanding or your thinking around this concept, it seems like it's a skill, like it is teachable, but it's like a skill that some people would naturally be better at. Like how have you evolved this in a practical sense in the workplace? Like how are you finding people that are good at this and helping them evolve this or flex this skill?
Yeah. Well, actually, this is part of why I care so much about framing it this way, because so again, in the design world, there's these parallels to the way that we think about it, where there's kind of like, oh, that person's magically good at communicating with stakeholders. You know, that's just kind of like, that's a special person. They're good at this. Most people aren't. Like, let them do their special thing. Let's try to hire more people. And in design, you get like kind of these, like, that's an amazing designer. He just comes up with these gold ideas. It's so mystical. It's so mythical. Like, but actually, when you study it as a type of intelligence, you can start to understand, okay, here's like how to build up this skill. Like it is a skill set, and you can build it, and you can like change the like neural pathways you have by exercising them and like solidifying them. I don't know all the right terminology, but it's like your brain isn't just like set a certain way. There's like neuroplasticity where you can like, by thinking in a design sense, you'll establish those pathways. It'll be easier. You'll be able to do it more quickly. So again, parallel to what we're talking about in the design world, a lot of Nigel Cross's writing is about like, here's how to train people this way. Like, this isn't mystical. You can train people. Here's some evidence. Like, he had a really good example of cab drivers. I actually can't remember this, if it was him or a different book, but like cab drivers in New York, their brains that do like spatial reasoning are like really huge because they can like, you know, navigate through the street. So it's just like, this is something that you can like learn. This isn't just set in stone. And so I think that to your question of like, how does this implement in the workplace? I'd say the reason why I like talking about this is because by starting to adopt this myself, I saw myself become a better data scientist and a better analyst. And like, just having the framework, for me, understanding a framework goes so far. Like, I just feel like safe and like I know what to do and what to say. And so I want other people to feel that too. And it's just kind of like, hey guys, guess what? There's like this super helpful way to frame this that will help you do your work better. But in terms of like practically speaking, I mean, this is, I think, probably still in the realm of a somewhat radical idea. So I can't sit here and say like, and then all my coworkers at every place I've like worked adopted this and like, we're all better for it. You know, I think in some ways the reason I talk about it in the podcast and give talks about it is because you have to find people who are like open to this. And so because
that feels like there's sort of two thresholds. The first one is that somebody has to actually recognize that there's something there. I mean, a super simplistic example is like data visualization. Like it matters. And I feel like there are analysts who are going to dig their heels in and say, the data is accurately represented on this chart. I'm not a designer. I don't have design talent. It makes sense to me. So no, like this data visualization stuff doesn't matter. And if you can't get them to recognize that, oh, when those other analysts show their stuff to stakeholders, they have much better, like they have to first realize that there is value. And then once they realize it, then it's like, okay, can I learn it and can I teach it? And I feel like that may be in every profession, but I think there's a challenge for, if an analyst doesn't say, it is problematic. And I will say I get irritated when somebody says, oh, Tim, you're just good at that thing.
Yeah.
And therefore they don't even try. And I'm like, well, no, it's because I realized it was important and I practiced it and I sucked at it for a long time, but I read some stuff and I tried to get better. So it does feel like
Tim, I do love how I have had that exact same example. And somehow when you describe it, it's like this negative thing and like, old mate in your team is being lazy. Whereas normally someone says to me, hey, Mo, you're good at this thing. Like, can you help me learn how to do it? And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like, I feel like it comes naturally to me.
Yeah.
But let me try and help you learn it. Whereas, Tim, you're like, they're just lazy.
Well, I mean, not just anybody's the quintessential analyst here.
Oh,
so
come on.
Really, that's somehow.
Oh man.
But that's, it's more the ones who I've run into. I mean, I years ago in my career, I had back when I would agreed to manage a team because I didn't know how much that would suck the life out of me. I had a guy say like basically argue with me and be like, no, this is how this, and I'm like, wow, like you're not seeing how wrong you are. Like I've got to get you to understand, and I can try to explain it. If you're not open to it, which goes back, I mean, if you're not open to this might be better, and really you want to be like open to at least trying it a little bit. Cause it sounds like with you, it's like, I won't be good at it. I've read some books. I tried to apply it. It was going to be clunky, but it was a net positive. Let me learn more. But that's scary, I think, to people.
I mean, this is, I have lots of thoughts here, which is that, my first thought is that this is, again, not to just be a broken record here, but this is, again, what I see the design world doing that we don't, where it's like, you won't find a designer who's like, user testing doesn't matter, right? You're just kind of like taught that early on, and that's seen as an important part of the job. And so if we were doing that with analyses where it's like, hey, like when you're in an intro to statistics class or applied statistics class, I should say, like you have to get user feedback. Here's the form that you're going to use. Like, even if it's just like a terrible version of it, people would then not necessarily like that would be the default, and they would have to proactively go against the default to be like, no, this doesn't actually matter. But then to your deeper point of that really comes down to like empathy. And then this is where I get very like San Francisco and just say like I think a big evolution in my life is that I think people, especially in the Western world, empathy is seen as this like character trait. You know, it's like you're born with empathy or not, or like this is a set thing. But I feel strongly, and I feel like I have evidence that, I mean, not me, like, I believe there's ample evidence in the world that this is actually capacity that you can expand through like contemplative practice or other means. Like for me, it's been a lot of meditation. And so people are it's so sad to me. Like people pigeonhole themselves and they cut off this like expansion that's possible. And so like when I give these talks, I usually end with this super hippie thing of like, if you want to like, a way to get better at your job is to like meditate or to figure out ways to expand your empathy. That is possible. That's not a set character trait. So many people in tech think they're like robots or not empathetic. It's like, no, this is just like everything else. It's a skill. You can build these neural networks. You can like, this can be something that you cultivate, and then you will see your work improve. But I mean, talk about you cannot just like tell someone that and they're like, oh, okay, I'll totally change my mindset and my ways and my life. But I share your frustration. Like having someone say like, well, I'm just not that way is like, it's like frustrating and sad to me, you know?
Yeah. But you can feel where they're coming from though, right?
Oh, 100%.
With the empathy. No, that was trying to tie it back around.
Yeah. Tim loves when the conversation steers to empathy, don't you?
So, Hilary, how has this epiphany changed your own work practice?
Well, so again, I feel like I've spent the last few years so I read another really influential book called Creative Curve that was essentially saying like, practically speaking, here's the way that creative people work. Like they consume media, some amount of it. Like when you interview like creative geniuses, they're usually like consuming a ton of media. They usually have these creative communities where they're spitballing ideas back and forth. Like here's some other practical steps. And so I think that if you think about like what people are open to is like a bell curve where you have, you know, at the very, you know, 2 standard deviations above, you have people who are like the trendsetters and they're always looking for new stuff. And, you know, they want to, you know, be set. They're the street fashion of the world, whatever application, you know. But then most people are kind of in the middle of the bell curve and they just want like tried and true. They just want to wear the stuff from Stitch Fix. And then you have like the laggers, whatever. But you can think about like analytics that way where it's like, oh, like we all probably are like the street fashion people. We're like want to know the latest methods and the latest whatever. But the people who are consumers are usually in the middle of the curve where they're like used to seeing Excel sheets. They might be open to like a little bit of fanciness, but you really just can't push people far from where they are. And so I think one of the hardest things as an analyst is that you get these ideas for like really cutting edge, beautiful methods and visualizations and like, oh, I want to make a shiny dashboard for this, or, you know, you kind of like go crazy with the cutting edge stuff. And so you have to like wrangle yourself back to like, wait, but my consumer is not there almost by definition. Otherwise they wouldn't be like hiring me to do this work. And so like one way that this has really tangibly helped me is just like recognizing when I'm like at that end of the belt, like at 2 standard deviations above, and then I have to like wrangle myself back to the middle, even though I don't necessarily want to. So like that's kind of abstract, but
so why do you have to wrangle yourself back to the middle? Because you feel like you're losing the audience? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in general, like, and this is I'm sort of filling in a bunch of, but in that Creative Curve book, for example, you can kind of study how far people can get pushed past their comfort zone of like, hey, like if you took someone from the like 1800s and you played modern music for them, they would be like, I can't comprehend. Like this is incomprehensible to me. And so you can only kind of push people like so far from their current context. And so within analytics, it's like, oh, like if you work with people who are in financial analytics, they've got these like super massive Excel sheets with like 50 different tabs and macros going all over the place. And so you couldn't necessarily give them like a D3 interactive visualization like that, like a bunch of very visual, kind of what Tim was mentioning. Like you couldn't necessarily get those people to just like adopt this radically new thing, but you could like put a little bit of visualization in there.
Oh my God, I've just had an epiphany about why working with finance is so hard.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's hard for me too, because it's so far from our training. Like, it's not even like, oh, you're a part of the bell curve that I was never at. Like, I never learned these methods. So,
oh my gosh, I'm laughing so hard.
I'm happy.
Oh my God, I seriously, like the last week I've been like, why is finance so hard to work with? And wow.
I don't know why, but this reminds me that a friend of mine back in like the early 2000s, like the first tech boom, I guess, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, he needed to create like people were doing their expensive, like emailing Excel sheets, whatever it was at the time. And so he created this like program that was just taking an Excel sheet and like making it all white and putting one cell in the middle that was like a button and it was like click here, and it was all like macros to make it happen, but it made it like a submittable form even though it was like opening the same program and everything looked the same. So it's just like creative solutions like that where it's like, okay, this is mostly the same, a little different, but like it's incredibly like you have to. People aren't going to think that's fun analytics work because it's not like their playful space. You know, it's like, oh, I want to be out there doing new D3 stuff. And it's like, well, that's not the job.
Well, I mean, but you have the stakeholders and then you have the analysts. And I do get frustrated with it. It's interesting because I think finance, because it is, you know, you're dealing with FASB and regulations and gap and all this stuff, like it is a structured, how am I recognizing revenue and do I have one type of traceability? And so there is a degree, and I may be insulting finance, that you get a process and you need your repeatable way of presenting. And then you've got finance who's trying to do some level of forecasting. I feel like in our world, any analyst that says, no, if the analyst says I'm good here, they need, if they're saying, if we're having a debate as to whether they're comfortable taking a small step forward or a huge leap forward, I'm okay. If they say no, and I can think of some analysts who I knew them 10 years ago and they were building dashboards in Excel and I was building dashboards in Excel and I was coming up with clever ways to do better layouts and automation and robustness. And 10 years later, they're building dashboards in Excel. There are 3 jobs removed and they haven't moved in their value that they're delivering. Because to me, the analyst needs to be, you need to be kind of pushing the company forward at the rate that they will take it. Because if you stay still, you're going to move back. That sounds like that is a cliche. If you stand still, you're going backwards. But I think that, I mean, if I look at where I was 5 years ago saying, I'm going to dive into this R thing, maybe longer than 5 years ago, and I'm in a completely different, I've been in this space for 20 years, you know, and I was the guy saying, I can do what you can do in Tableau. I can do that just as well in Excel. And I may still, maybe outside some of the connections. So I don't know. I think I still lack the patience for people who, if they say, I want to stay still, then that's problematic. And I feel like that's the same for stakeholders too. Because, quick little side rant. I feel like a challenge in our world is that if you're at a company that is standing still, people are still going to leave that company, but move up in their careers and go to the next company and think that is the norm and the standard. Like that's how things, how many times have I had a client who says, well, we got the weekly report in an Excel file at my last company And now I'm at the new company. I'm in a more senior title, but I just want to do what we did at my last company, get the weekly report in an Excel file. And then you've got junior analysts who say, that's what analytics is. I produce the weekly report in an Excel file. And then they move up and they go to another company and say, man, I know how to make the week. And that's a problem.
But
like
again,
that,
Tim, you could inverse this and say the exact opposite, right? So like that's companies moving in the wrong direction. But if you had people, I guess, adapting and learning a little bit, and then they take that to their next companies, those companies are going to get pushed forward.
But I think the balance is way, I think it is a lot easier it takes a lot more energy to move. When I come into a new company and they may say, we're bringing you in with your experience to help us move forward. But I mean, I've had that. I've been told by massive pharma company, I'm sorry if they're listening right now, but the data science work we were doing, they're like, we don't know anything about data science. Teach us. The experimentation work we were doing, they're like, we don't know about experimentation. Teach us. The analytics work, which was kind of my world, they're like, ooh, yeah, do the biweekly PowerPoint, please, but do grander insights. And I'm like, well, maybe we need to change the way you're thinking, and it takes, because in their mind, that's what they're conditioned to do. It is getting people to think that what they've done, there might be a better way, is a lot harder. There's much more of a, I don't know. I feel like
that
this was our
massive
discussion.
Rant.
It's a very, but Mo, you and I had this discussion years ago because in Australia, right, we were having a discussion where I was like, your take was that in many ways you feel like Australia leapfrogged the U.S. This was years ago we had this discussion. The U.S. like drove into a big fat lazy boy recliner of complacency. Like the size of that, the mean, there are lots of companies that have settled at a spot that it is.
I do think though, Tim, in hindsight, that the companies I've worked at are probably pretty similar to Hilary in that like kind of startup-y tech companies, like on the bell curve, we probably do lean towards more advanced data analytics capabilities and mindsets versus maybe like if I'd worked at some of the big companies here, maybe I would have had a more similar experience.
And that's, I've worked with big pharma, old insurance companies, financial services. So
I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Certainly the tech angle makes it a little bit specific because you can go very deep in your specific stack and do very complex things. But I worked for a retail apparel company and they used Excel for everything and we were still doing some pretty amazing analytics. So it's possible to do, but it goes back and forth.
Well,
and
that's what you think. But see, that's just where
that is what I think, Tim, and I got the numbers to back it up. Thank you very much. Anyways, but I think
was 10 years ago.
Well, I keep doing the same thing with the same companies that I work with today. I just don't bring them up all the time on the podcast, Tim. It is interesting. I don't know where I was going with that, except to be like, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it, Mo, and that it's tricky to try. The industry is too big in America because there's actually probably 3 different industries in the U.S. There's sort of like the tech layer, then there's sort of like fast growth and follower, and then there's sort of big enterprise. And they all kind of do slightly different things. They do move back and forth between each other a lot. But what I've noticed is like there's people in this layer that I've never talked to because I spend a lot of my time consulting in this layer. And so as I'm like learning new spaces, I'm finding out like whole communities and groups that I'd never heard of before. So
Michael, I'd like to remind you this is an audio format, so you're
up here, down here. I do that a lot.
I know.
That's right.
I get that.
We'll leave it up to the listener's imagination as to which layers Michael was referring to.
Yeah, just picture in your head. The layers could be either way. See, that's the beauty of it. Sorry.
I mean, my guess, pure speculation here, but I feel like probably the places where you've seen analysis stagnate is highly correlated with how much regulation there is for the application, like both in terms of the company size and, like financial, like there's so many specifics for finances.
If you can't tie your data back to like what your job is or what it means, like I did analytics for McDonald's for a while. McDonald's does not care about web analytics very much at that point in time. They do care a little, but it's sort of like, how does the analytics we're doing on this website contribute to same store sales year over year? Because that's actually the problem I'd like to solve. And so like my work was not very meaningful in that context because I couldn't tell people how many burgers we sold. Yeah.
Golden opportunity for randomized controlled trials. Like,
yeah. Well, and they've continued to invest and do all kinds of crazy things now.
But I don't know about the regulation. I mean, I think there's an age of the company. That's been my observation.
Yeah.
Like there is financial services highly regulated, but fintech, like startups, high growth. Like I suspect, even though they will Robinhood will trip over themselves multiple times, but I suspect that their infrastructure and the things that they're doing are probably pretty good. Same thing, I think, with healthcare. For the healthcare that's trying to be disruptors, even though they got to deal with HIPAA, so they figure out a way to hash stuff so that they can do
like
stuff
like Theranos. Cutting edge.
Well, yeah, okay, another good example.
Well, no, but I get it's funny because even though. I feel the need to defend the people you're talking about who stay stagnant because I feel like it's just all like, well, okay,
Michael can defend himself quite well.
But I'm trying to think of a quintessential. He's not a quintessential analyst, from what I understand.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm absolutely not.
This is.
But
I help people understand Tim better.
Yes, I got it. I guess what my thought is just like there's got to be reasons why someone doesn't feel the need to innovate on that specific thing, like, and my guess is that like how many I personally have been like, ooh, I want to try this new thing. And even like in grad school, I remember this is such a specific product, but do you guys remember Google Wave at all?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this was like, I guess in like 2010, 11, maybe 2012. It was Google's answer to like what email should be. It was essentially like a version of Google Docs. Like kind of the big innovation was the interactive, like if you were typing, the other person could see what you're typing in real time. And so I was like this big cutting edge person. I always wanted to do the latest tech. And I remember like trying to get my advisor, Jeff Leake, to use Google Wave. And he finally had to just be like, I can't do this again. Like you're asking too much of me to like keep trying these niche products that don't go. I mean, Google Wave was sunset within like 2 years or something. I mean, it was a flash in the pan. And so it's like, I guess what I'm saying is that there are environments you find yourself in where the cost of innovating is so high, where it's like, oh man, I'm gonna have to figure out this way to like do our compliance docs are only acceptable in like XSL or whatever that like the new Excel format is. And so even if I was to do a fancy R program, I would still have to spit out this like XSL whatever, and like my boss is just going to be confused. They're not even going to like reward this behavior. And like, I feel like there's probably some complex set of incentives, and also just like that person's personal like motivation or what they find passion in, like might not be being that person who's two standard deviations above the curve, and like, that's a choice to who you'd hire and what type of behavior to incentivize. I think I'm feeling defensive of like, I totally get why people just stick with the status quo, especially when you're dealing with like arcane regulations. The other, not to just keep rambling, but the other example I can think of is I think in China, the like e-payments or like using your cell phone to pay for things is like everyone does it. It's like super, super common. Whereas here we're still on this, like it was such a big deal for us to even get to like chips on our credit cards. And so there's kind of like that innovator's dilemma thing too, where it's just like, oh, right. Cause they were like kind of starting from scratch, getting everyone like ramped up on mobile payments versus here. It's like this big, like change to this regulated industry.
So one more counterpoint on these people.
Yes, these people.
Well, one, I mean, there are people who are still using Excel, but they're using it horribly and efficiently, and they're therefore just like pushing. And they're like that, not even like driving towards. If you're going to do this, at least find ways to do that well. So that's one part. But I think the really big one that is, I think, hugely problematic, and I would say it goes to thinking about the system, is like paid media. And we've had various episodes of this show that have come at it in different ways, where if you think through the incentive structure for display advertising and social media advertising, and think through the different players in ad tech and martech and advertisers and publishers, it is so obviously a system with stacked incentives to not actually deliver value and yet report that you're delivering value. And that's another one that you roll into a company and say, can we just logically, even if you just think through what you think your display media is doing, if you describe how you think it's working, it is such a weird ass bank shot to actually get to value. It logically makes no sense.
Yeah.
We can talk through the causality of how you're actually measuring it. It's all completely, and they're like, nope, we don't want to rock the boat because the pixel fired and the affiliates are getting credit for this purchase. Like, that drives me absolutely berserk, because that is a critical thinking. That is wouldn't you want to spend your company's money way more wisely? It's like, well, maybe not, because then I could do just what I'm doing with half the budget, and my budget would have shrunk and my prestige will have shrunk.
Okay, it's time for the Conductrix quiz, the quizzical query that makes us feel really intelligent. And we're representing our listeners today. Let's talk a little bit about Conductrix. Do you know how A/B testing vendors a lot of times promise sort of the silver bullet to make every experiment easy, and running an effective program is actually really hard work? You need a technology partner that is not only innovative, but also honest with you about the challenges of building and maintaining successful experimentation programs. And for over a decade, Conductrix has partnered with some of the world's largest companies to help discover and deliver effective customer experiences. They offer best-in-class technology for A/B testing, contextual bandits, and predictive targeting. And they're always providing honest feedback and going above and beyond to help clients achieve their testing and experimentation goals. Go check them out at conductrix.com, and let's get the quiz underway. Okay, Mo, do you want to know which of our listeners you are playing for?
Sure.
All right, and you have a special celebrity guest.
I finally, my pleas to phone a friend have finally worked.
And so, Hilary, you're joining Mo's team. So, listen, there is no, but if you two don't win, I don't know. Anyways, here's who's hoping. I hope you do win. I think it'll be amazing. All right. Who you're representing is Christopher Patterson. Christopher is a listener, and he hails, I think, it doesn't matter where he comes from. Anyways, Christopher being represented by Mo and Hilary. Very exciting. So, Tim, are you ready?
I'm ready.
This could be your greatest victory ever, Tim. Tim, you are representing James Murphy, also a listener to the show. All right, here is the question. It's a fairly long one.
I feel like the stakes are very low for me here. So
feel free to jot down notes or things like that. It goes for a little bit. Okay, picture this scene.
Wait a minute. Oh, Matt Gershoff provided a long stem winder of a setup question for this?
Yeah.
Had to happen eventually. It's very on brand.
Yeah, exactly. All right, picture this scene. Mo and Tim are drinking tea and quietly chatting amongst themselves when, without warning, Michael barges into the room with a panicked look on his face. With his phone in one hand and his other hand covering the phone's receiver, he whispers a bit too loudly, "I'm on the phone with a client who's asking how to calculate something called the standard error of the estimate. Can either of you help me out?" And you reply, "Sure. The standard error is just," this is where we get into multiple choice, A, the standard deviation divided by n, where n is the sample size. B, the mean value divided by the square root of the variance. C, the mean value divided by the standard deviation squared. D, the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. Or E, the square root of the variance divided by n.
I stopped taking notes because I was like, clearly, I am not going to be helpful in answering this.
It's just standard error, Mo. All right.
This is
there a
one
time component, or should
there's really not, and there's a lot of leeway here, Hilary. So feel free to sort of explore the space. It's really not really gonna be. We're not doing the whole Jeopardy song. Oh,
I know. I'm like, I know now.
Okay.
I'm doubting myself, but
don't doubt yourself.
I believe it's. I don't remember what letter it is, but standard deviation divided by square root of n.
That would be D, the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. Okay.
Yeah.
Mo, do you concur?
I wholeheartedly concur.
Tim, what would your answer be?
I mean, I have read these so often, and it's like such a simple.
Yeah, these aren't
thing.
super complex.
Then,
it makes me feel like I shouldn't have been so panicked on the phone, and honestly.
Like, I just want to know the client that wants this. That's the suspect part.
I mean, Matt's been known to give us homework and find shortcuts for things, and it's when do you wind up with an n-1 though? That's only aren't there some cases where you do? There were no n-1, so I don't have to worry about that.
That's true. None of the answers. Do you need me to read any of those back to you, Tim?
Well, I had the square root of the variance divided by the square root of n for D, so apparently I got the wrong.
That's E. Square root of the variance divided by n. That's E. D is the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. And then there's also...
That is the square root of the variance divided by the square root of n, right?
So he's being...
Oh, yeah. Tim, you like did extra...
I think I
was
honing... Which he would definitely be the sort of guy who would give two correct answers. Yeah, because the standard deviation is... Yeah, so my simple minding that standard deviation, you're basically looking at you're squaring things so because you can go above and below and you're trying to kind of, that gives you the variant, and then you got to square root it to kind of get it back to where it's kind of an absolute value sort of thing. I'm going to go with the square root of the variance over the square root of n, even though that doesn't, because I think that's the same thing.
The square root of the variance divided by the square root of n? That's not one of the answers, Tim.
What did you say the last, what was E?
E is the square root of the variance divided by n.
Oh. Okay. Then that would be, I'm going to pass.
I'm going to pass. All right.
Wow. You've never passed before.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, and we're just going to rip the Band-Aid right off. Mo and Hilary, you win.
Right.
Christopher Patterson, you're a winner. Tim, you had the right answer, and I wouldn't let you pick it because they had already picked D, but you had worked that out. So
square root of variance divided by square root of n is standard deviation divided by square root of n.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically had worked out the problem a different way, but got to the same answer.
You actually,
I mean, I had it written down. I had written down E. I was trying to,
Hilary was like, I think I understand what this is. So Hilary and Mo took it home. It's a matter of record. So
I
great
literally
job.
just have this memorized. It's like one of the few things that I just have memorized.
That's, folks, if you're listening, that's what you get from a PhD at Johns Hopkins this kind of knowledge.
I'm seriously glad I got it right, because
I was listening to you the other day talk about the different things that you memorized and how in some cases, like, it's worth just memorizing these formulas. And I was like, I'm never doing that. And then here is an example.
Memorize the p-value sentence. Like, you'll just be happy that you've done it. It's like...
All right.
Same with, like,
but
the
that
depth
was,
of, yeah.
I mean, it does, I mean, because I remember a little bit of an epiphany. Standard deviation is basically kind of it's the overall standard errors when you're getting into trying to figure out how much, like, your sampling variability, right? Like, like that little light bulb goes on a little bit. And I think this is amazing and so cool that based on the size of my sample, I can predict the distribution, even if I don't know the mean and there's kind of an inverse. So
this is the hardest.
That's when I want to get to
moment.
the intuition around all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I feel like you're getting there, Tim. As opposed to
Yeah.
me, that still, like, needs Matt Gershoff to give me stats homework.
Mo, I also just feel like you don't give yourself enough credit too.
I concur with Michael. It's happened. I agree with Michael.
I mean, in this case, you solved the problem a different way by picking a highly qualified teammate. So, it's like, look it doesn't matter how you get to the finish line, you got there. That's the important thing. Anyway, all right, let's wrap up the Conductors quiz. Big thanks to Conductors for putting these crazy questions together. Thank you, Mo and Tim, and especially you, Hilary, for joining in this week. Big ups to everybody, and let's get back to the show.
Yeah. I got really mad about a website. So does anyone know Poshmark in this?
I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, so it's essentially like eBay for clothes, just for clothes, where it's a selling and buying platform, and it's very structured to be selling clothing. So, and it makes it easy for the seller, but they incentivize the absolute weirdest user behavior, where essentially they want you to, like, in order for your listings to show up, you have to buy that with clicks. So it's like, oh, you have to be, like, interacting with other people and, like, essentially retweeting their listings and stuff. So much so that people employ bots, or, like, they, like, get bots to do all this behavior so that their listings show up. And so now I'm selling stuff on there right now. So now I have bots. So, like, all the clicks on that website are literally bots talking to each other. And it's just like, what is, I literally was like, is this a scam? Like, was this all part of, like, oh, let's get our daily active users up for our earnings report? Because I was just like, this is insane. You're not even paying the company. You're paying, like, a third party bot maker to, so it's, anyway, I feel you, where it's just like, is anyone in that room, like, thinking about this? Because this is, like, not, so I'm acting like, oh, you should empathize with these people, but then I get frustrated too, so, you know.
So you got to go back to meditation.
I know, yeah, and just be like, I'm empathizing with those executives who want those Dow Mao numbers up for their earnings call.
Yeah. Well, it is hard because there is a limit to empathy. It's weird that we started a conversation about systems thinking and data science, and we're talking about empathy, but I love it. And unfortunately, we do have to wrap up because I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
I actually would love to do another topic with you at some point, but we'll just see.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something to this whole meditation thing in analytics for analytics people. So maybe that's a whole other episode of a podcast.
Can we also just say that everyone needs to go read Hilary's paper on opinionated analysis development? Because I was dying to talk about that and we didn't get there. And it's got a lot of topics in there that are near and dear to my heart. So it's worth a read.
Can I read the quote that made me fall out of my chair?
Oh,
and then
do it.
Yes.
Well, the point when you said when an error in an analysis occurs, it is safe to assume, aside from nefarious actors, that the analyst did not want that error to occur. Given that she thought she was producing an analysis free from errors, you must look at the way she developed the analysis to understand where the error occurred and create safeguards so that the error does not occur again. I was like, oh, that's the case for that. I was like, oh, that kind of
No,
blew me
I
away.
mean, well, thank you. I'm glad I was able to, like, transfer the way I was blown away from this concept to other people, because that actually was something that came up I learned about this sort of framework of error, like, I can't remember, there's some formal word for this, but like how you frame errors from my work at Etsy. And that was a big thing within the culture there. And there was like this framework from this book, the title I can't remember, but it was this whole idea of like, oh, I had the same epiphany moment that you did, where it was just like, oh my gosh, like I understand why it's easy to blame a person, but if you like switch your framework, you can actually get to these productive conversations. And to tie it to the empathy thing, I think that in some ways all these frameworks are just like forcing kids to play nice with each other, It's like, oh, let's enforce this blameless mindset and like tell you what to say and how to say it, and let's do design sprints where people are forced to listen to each other. And it's like, that's kind of like going through the motion of, hey, let's make sure that you have empathy for people, and if you can't make it, you got to fake it, right?
Well, assume good intent. Like that early on in COVID, my daughter's principal, and she was kind of rolling her eyes. I mean, she's a teenager, so it happens. And it was like the only thing I overheard him saying. And he was like, we're heading into a really challenging, just assume good intent. And I'm like, oh my God, the number of times Michael was trying to undermine me at every possible turn, but everybody else, I now assume good intent.
But with all the best intentions, Tim, with all the best intentions.
No, I don't think so. Nefarious.
I would put assume good intention as it's simple, but it's hard. I would say that it is not something that hearing someone say that, like, does not change my emotional reaction. Like, hearing people say I should do that did not make me do it. Like, I would say it was a lot harder work to get to the point where I'm like, let me think about it from their perspective.
Well, I assume good intent, and then I'm like, yeah, but they're a fucking moron. So I'm like, yeah, no.
So basically,
I guess I'm not good. Time to start meditating.
What we're learning, Tim, is you don't have good intent. So it's sort of like it doesn't really matter what other people. Yeah. All right, I
want other people to assume that, though.
Yeah. Well, I'll assume that we got to start wrapping up the show. Hilary, what a pleasure, frankly, to have you on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was super fun. And I'm happy to chat again, if you want.
Oh my God, I feel like we could have talked for another 5 hours, so.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for. You might just get a couple.
But I feel bad that we didn't talk about the opinionated analysis stuff, because I can go on about that too.
Wow. There you go. Well, it sounds like maybe the next time is in store already. But yeah, if you get a couple one-on-one conversations on your calendar that were quote-unquote gonna be for a podcast, but it's just Mo or me, then that's probably just us, like, wanting to hang out. Anyway, all right. One thing we do love to do is go around the horn and share a last call, something that we think might be of interest to our audience. And why don't we do that now? Hilary, you're our guest. Do you have a last call you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I was thinking this through. As you all know, maybe listeners, I took this long break after the Biden campaign, so I couldn't really conjure something work related for this. So instead, I'll just talk about hobbies. So I started using a 3D printer. Like, I bought one, nice. I built it from a kit. Oh my gosh, it was really hard. I don't recommend that, but if that's something that you're curious about, it's been such a joy to learn that, and way easier than I thought. So I was super intimidated by that, and I wanted to use this opportunity to be like, you should try it. If you're thinking about it, you can learn the software, you can do it, growth
but
mindset.
You're also throwing pottery?
Yeah.
Have you tried to actually print anything that you also, to see whether you can make things that are... Yeah.
This was the grand plan. So it's funny because I've never had a hobby like this, where I've had over a year where I'm trying to do... So my whole 3D printing thing was in service of the pottery, where I want to be able to 3D print models that then I can build plaster molds for, which I can then use to make pottery items. So I actually just today, for the first time, have a pot, a clay item that I made that's mimicking a 3D printed thing. So anyway, the point is, I never thought this was me, but I want people to if they're oh, I really want to take a pottery class, I really want to do 3D printed, I want to be the person who's pushing them over the edge. So yes, I'm deep in the physical world realm right now and loving it.
Nice.
I will say past like guest Matt Policastro, another kind of data science person over COVID, like completely got into 3D printing.
Nice.
As well.
It's like a very self-sufficient. You're like, I'll make my own stuff. I don't need anything.
That's awesome. All right, Tim, what about you?
So I am going to recommend a book that I just read that is Data Work, a jargon-free guide to managing successful data teams by Taylor Rogers. Now, I'll caveat it. It is a self-published book, but not self-published like get a PDF. Like there is a physical book. But earlier we were talking, one of the things he talks about is evaluating your stakeholders on two axes. One is their low to high IQ. And then the other is low to high direction, which I think the low to high direction was like how clear are they on what they want. But it is strange. His very last chapter is like best personality types for data work. And I love the list of like good for data work, like skeptics, number geeks, tinkerers, consensus builders, creatives, storytellers, and life learners. And he talks about each one of them, what he means. And then he has the ones like, and these are the ones that are kind of crappy for data work, and it's know-it-alls, bossy pants, blamers, reactionaries, incurious, technically averse, and rogues. And I was thinking of so many people who have been awesome to work with or terrible to work with, and just that last chapter. And it's literally the last chapter. It's a self-published book. I think if he'd gone somewhere else, they would have said, you need to have a conclusion chapter that brings it all together. Nope. It just like literally ends. I think he was like, and I'm done. It's my own book. But it's a quick read. I mean, it's only like 160 pages. But if managing a team, I actually thought there were some really good points. Wow, actually, he also talked about how one of the big parts of the responsibilities is just to have data that can be trusted, which is funny because Hilary, you talked about on the Biden campaign. You're like, yeah, basically our number one thing was to not have a big boo-boo that we had to come back with later.
Yeah,
so
like not be responsible for Biden losing and Trump winning.
Yeah, I think
having
good.
To
good job.
that every night.
Yeah.
Wow. So Tim, you're thinking of going back into management, huh? Very interesting.
Nope. I thought I might be buying this book for people who are.
Oh, you're just gonna be like, since you're my new manager here, I want you to read this. I've circled the appropriate parts for you. Yeah. Mo, what about you? What's your last call?
So, a couple of days ago, myself and Zoe Mears, she's an amazing data analyst that I work with who used to work for the ABC here in Australia, which is our public broadcaster. So she was doing kind of data journalism. We did a session together for Canva on storytelling with data. So it's all like data viz, tips and tricks and how to use Canva, to make stuff look good in data visualization. So that's recorded, and I'll share the link from our design school so you can check that out. But everyone know, you guys know that I'm obsessed with Adam Grant. I love the man. And I've had this book sitting on my shelf for ages that I've meant to read, but I just kind of haven't gotten there. And Adam Grant started tweeting bits of that book. And now it's giving me, I guess, the kick up the butt I need to go read it, which is Daniel Pink's book. So one of the things that Adam Grant found in it that he was, I guess, going on about was how much people are multitasking during virtual meetings. So I don't know where the number 30% came from because I'm going to have to read the book. But basically in Daniel Pink's book, he talks about how to have meetings at the right time of day to limit how much multitasking people do in virtual meetings. And so Adam Grant's talking about the fact that basically put them in the afternoon, keep them short and small to avoid multitasking. So now I feel like I have to read that book that's been sitting there for a while, because if Adam Grant's into it, then I probably will be too. So
it's funny because I was writing down the title when you said it and I was like, oh, I'm multitasking right now.
Oh, yeah, there's just a lot of that happens, especially in the Zoom world. Yes. All right.
What about you, Michael?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So I ran across on Twitter the other day an author who just released a book recently. Her name is Renee Teat, and she wrote a book called SQL for Data Scientists. So I thought that was fascinating, given her background as a data scientist. And sometimes SQL as a language is not necessarily one that data scientists necessarily start with, but it's becoming much more common to see interplay across those. So I thought for our listeners who kind of live in either of those realms, that might actually be an interesting book for you to pick up and read. So thought I'd mention that. And I've got one more. It just so happens, Tim, I'm cruising through your neighborhood in a week or so. On October 12th, it looks like I will be coming on to the search discovery education community to talk a little bit about people and soft skills. So I'm super excited. I don't know exactly what I'm going to talk about yet as we're recording this, but I've been in contact with Adam and we're working on a little topic there. So it should be a lot of fun. I'm excited. There's a lot of good ground to cover, and might even use some of this podcast as material, because it sounds like, Hilary, you've delved into some of these realms as well. So, always good to get lots of ideas for this stuff. What makes an analytics person tick? Yeah. Usually anger and wanting to see their work matter. Those are the two things.
Is rage coding? Is that one of the?
I don't know what makes them tick. Anyways, okay, those are our last calls. Of course, as you've been listening to this episode, and we've covered a lot of different ground, and it's just been delightful, Hilary, to have you on the show. You're someone we've wanted to chat with on the show for years, and obviously we all really appreciate Not So Standard Deviations, your podcast with Roger. And if you're a listener of this show and you haven't listened to that show, I think you need to start, because it's pretty great. Anyway, we know no show is complete without chatting with you, the listener, just a little bit, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out to us, you can do that. It's really easy. There's ways to do that on the Measure Slack or on Twitter, or we have a LinkedIn group for you to reach out and ask questions. And Hilary, I know you are active on the social medias. Do you want to share your Twitter profile? Yeah. People could follow you on Twitter.
Unpronounceable HSPTER, so Hispter.
Yes.
You probably have more success. Just Google Hilary Parker.
Yeah, anyways, but Hilary is on Twitter and is a great person to follow. I think I've followed you for many years, so that's a good place to keep up with what you're up to and doing. So that's awesome. And of course, no show would be complete without thanking Josh Crowhurst, I don't know, we got to think of the right accurate.
Esteemed?
Yeah. It's
inimitable?
Sort of like, but he's dignified.
Quintessential?
Inimitable is a good word, but he's our producer and we love him. Thank you, Josh, for all you do. We think you're fantastic. All right. So I know that as you go through life, you may have many challenges and situations where you need to step aside and just meditate for 5 minutes to regain your center. But no matter what happens, I know I speak for both of my co-hosts, Tim and Mo, when I say keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. Let's keep the conversation going with your comments, suggestions, and questions on Twitter at @AnalyticsHour, on the web at analyticshour.io, our LinkedIn group, and the Measure Chat Slack group. Music for the podcast by Josh Crowhurst.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Analytics. Oh my God. What the fuck does that even mean?
But Tim is the smart one. He's also known as the quintessential analyst. I don't know if he mentioned that in his lead up to the show. But if you could drop that during any time, that would be really appreciated.
Okay, got it.
So, yeah. We should actually get that sponsored, Tim. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get you sponsored. Like, you're going to be the first sponsored analytics person. That's going to be amazing.
I think you've taken this far enough.
Okay, let's go. Let's keep going.
I mean, we're now forced to have fulfillment that we have the people can request. So not only do we have this, I'm the fulfillment guy.
Oh, so funny.
People get to I have to actually send them out. So every time somebody puts, they would like 5 podcast stickers and 0, I'm like, you're special. 0 quintessential analysts.
But it's good. This is, Hilary does meditation, and Tim, you do this podcast. It's sort of how you kind of like process through the stuff. No.
Rock, flag, and empathy.